who also led the ethics committee
Yep.
and some other things. So we are so excited to welcome him, and he's going to talk about burnout this afternoon.
Yeah.
So without further ado, he's going to go without the mic, but holler if you need him to use it. Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to be with you all. One person clapped before I started, so that's always dangerous. You want to wait till the end, just see how it goes before you commit to the clapping there. But very happy to be with you. Are you hearing me okay in the back if I'm at this volume? No one said anything, which means I can't hear anything I'm saying, right? Do you hear me okay back there? Okay, good. So yeah, we're going to talk about an important topic today, a topic that is unfortunately pretty widespread, that coworkers are concerned about, leaders are concerned about, executives are concerned about. It kind of goes all the way across everything right now. Healthcare, of course, is a place where burnout is hitting really, really hard. If you have any friends in education, you know it's hitting very hard there too. They're probably the place where it's hitting the hardest, and healthcare is right behind them in that number 2 spot of how much we're experiencing this burnout epidemic. And it's not isolated to certain pockets of healthcare. It's something that impacts all the way across, and so we're going to talk about that a little bit today. I do want to prove that I worked at Parkview, so here's me at Parkview. We got Parkview in the background. I did get to do a lot of interesting things that I enjoyed very much while I was at Parkview. I led 4 departments, the chaplaincy department being one of those, hospital volunteers, advanced care planning, spiritual development, and then as Kelly mentioned, worked with the ethics committee too. This is not a picture of the ethics committee. We're flying a drone, we're recording videos, doing some things for a TV channel that we created while I was here. So I feel like I have to prove that I was here because I also have to admit that when I was asked to speak to the business intelligence department, I had to ask one of my good friends, what is business intelligence? So I had to ask ChatGPT, what does a business intelligence department do in a healthcare system? Kelly gave me some ideas about your department. I felt like I needed a sort of a level setting to understand at least some of the scope of what you do, and I'm sure I've only gotten a little bit of an idea, but I wanted to at least have a little bit of an idea before we spent time talking together today. So here are some of the things, and you're going to have to nod or shake your head to confirm or deny. Does this look, was ChatGPT at all right about what you do? Does this look like it syncs with what you all do? Okay. That's good. This is a fact check for AI, right? And live human check to make sure it's accurate. Well, these are some pretty significant scope things. There's, of course, a lot more that it spit out, and a lot more that Kelly shared with me. Kelly told me a little bit about the personality of the group, the nature of their remote work, that sort of thing as well. She didn't exactly use the word nerds at any point in the email, for sure. She definitely did not say that. But maybe it was a little bit implied, as to the focus on data, being very accurate, that sort of thing. So the scope of what you do is pretty significant. The focus on how you understand what's happening within a healthcare system, how you translate those patient interactions, those financial transactions, those quality measures into something that speaks to executives that informs decisions of a whole healthcare system is really significant. As a person who did a lot of charting in Epic for many years, knowing that some of that is what you're pulling and you're seeing the different interactions, and then trying to give some advice on like how do we move forward during this unique time for healthcare, this unique time for Parkview. And I use unique because it sounds nice, right? It's a tumultuous time for nearly every industry, certainly for healthcare. Parkview stayed immune for longer than most to the rocking and the rolling of healthcare. We are no longer a hypothetical conversation for me. This is definitely a personal topic. If you've spent any time in the Parkview ER, you recognize the setting here, and we'll get into that here in just a little while. So some framework, some language around moral distress and burnout. This is a graphic developed by Amanda Rosen and her team of researchers to understand where does burnout come from. She says burnout starts on this side with moral awareness. Moral awareness is what it sounds like. You have a sense of what should be happening at work. This is how things should go. If you think back to when you graduated from college and you entered the workforce, or you think back to when you took the job or the role that you're in now, you probably had some set of either subconscious or articulated set of beliefs of like, this is how things should go. This is what we should be able to do. This is how work should go in this new environment. So that's where we start. And that's a good place. Does everyone start with moral awareness? Not exactly. You have worked with people, nobody in this room, nobody at Parkview for sure, but you have worked with people who do not care. They do not care about their work. They do not care about the outcomes. They do not care about how it impacts other people. They really don't start with moral awareness. Now, here's the good news for those people who, none of which are in this room. You know, if you don't care about how things are going at work, you're probably not going to burn out. So the opposite of that, the bad news is that for you, if you start caring about your work, if you start in a place where you care about the outcome, you care about how this impacts patients, your community, your coworkers, you start in that place of caring, that's actually the foundation for some of the distress that you'll face later. It's very unfair, and we'll talk about that unfairness in a little while. If you have moral awareness, you will experience moral distress. Moral distress is when things don't go the way you thought they were going to go. To put a finer point on it, they don't go the way you think they should go. And I've already revealed that I don't know a lot about your area, although one of my sons said they must be the smartest people at Parkview. It's the only department with intelligence in their name. So I think that's probably accurate enough. Rashid's nodding his head.
No,
So yeah, that's
like the best looking. But
the best looking. But that's not in your department name. Yeah. The business best looking department, yeah. But this is going to be audience participation time a little bit. So I know for introverts, which I am as well, it helps to have a little bit of advance warning when audience participation is coming. So this is that part. So there's your warning. For you in your industry, in your line of work, what might a new hire tell herself or tell himself about how things should go when they work in your department? What might be some general principles of this is the way things should go when I work this job?
I'm going to always know exactly what I'm supposed to be working on.
I'm going to always know exactly what I'm supposed to be working on, okay? All right. What's maybe another thing that somebody would tell themselves?
People will use everything I create.
Okay. So if I create something, if I'm working on a project, I deliver that, they will obviously use it and pay serious attention to it. Yeah, for sure. Okay. And love it. And applaud you and praise you at the city gates for providing this information, for sure. And always credit you, of course. Yeah, for sure.
I'll say if we deliver what they didn't want, that would help us.
Okay.
Not just complain to everyone else that needs to use it.
Okay. So there'll be honest feedback, not just complaining. This is theoretical, right? Yeah, theoretical. Hypothetically, that could happen.
Customers are going to be pretty clear on what exactly they want and know how to tell us what they want.
Yeah. So you might, I see lots of people smiling when you said that. Apparently that novelty has worn off for most of you in the room. You don't believe that necessarily any longer, that they're always going to be clear. So that expectation that the client's going to be clear about what they want.
Like clear and concise, like bullet points, here's what we
Medicare, you mean? Like CMS doesn't always make it clear. Okay.
surprise, surprise.
Surprise, surprise. But you would think if there was an entity that you could expect clarity from, it would be the ones who are making the rules, right? But not necessarily so. What's another way you might experience moral distress? Politics? Say a little more. You're not talking about the presidential election, although that could cause some moral distress too. But
Maybe some personal agendas or personal
okay. I love that. Well, and you were hitting on that, right? Your sense of this is the way it should be, and it's not.
They don't collect it right.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. What else? Yeah, Rashid.
I think there's conflicting priorities within the organization. So, and I'll speak kind of to, from my perspective, we're doing resilience, and sometimes if you go in a room, and the patient doesn't even exist in the room, right? And that should be the tops of our thoughts all the time. But it feels like we're in this place where all we talk about is money and being more efficient,
Okay.
but not really thinking okay, what's the impact on the patient, and how do we, if we start there and work the way backwards?
Yeah. So I have some examples coming up later that we're going to skip because I think your guys' examples are touching on some things that are more closely linked to what your experience. And I'm realizing that some of my experiences are more closely linked to what you guys do than I realized. So, for instance, I won't go into my personal health history because that's privacy protected, of course, but I'm only going to disclose the amount to which you actually need it for your business purposes, to be able to move forward. But I have a hereditary thing where I have to have blood taken off of me every month. Now it's every 6 months. And so I go to a location, is that vague enough? I'd go to a location and have that blood taken off. For a long time, there was one piece of equipment that was used for that was quite effective. And then one day I went in and it was a different piece of equipment. Some of you are already kind of starting to nod. What do you think I'm hinting at? I'll let you fill in the dots here. You're doing some nodding. Kind of connects with some of what you're talking about. Leeches? I would be lying. My doctor did say that would be effective, but unavailable most of the time at Parkview, unfortunately. We hadn't gone quite that far. Yeah.
Reason why got less.
Yeah.
Less quality.
Yeah. So a change. Why was a change? Was it because of the patient? No. It was because of budget. Now, for me, it was just as effective. No problem for me. So as the patient, actually, no moral distress for me whatsoever. Now, knowing Parkview a little bit, I could recognize, what was happening and why that was happening. Who do you think that has moral distress for, if not for me? The nurse. Absolutely. If she's in there trying to do what she needs to do and she's used one product that she knows is effective, and maybe she's done it for 2 years, 20 years, 35 years, and now there's some different product in there because of finances. Now, obviously, we're hoping that it's an equal product that's costing less, and so we're finding those places to adjust and that sort of thing. But certainly for her, if she's not confident in that, that's going to cause her some moral distress. What else? What else can cause moral distress for your area? Going back to some of our awareness and our expectations of how things will go.
Timelines, unrealistic timelines, where they want something to be perfect, but they don't give us time to make it perfect.
Yeah.
And unrealistic expectations
Of
on top of
perfect.
that.
Right.
Okay. So like their expectations are beyond what is reasonable and the timeline is unreasonable. Okay. We're going to get to
Upcoming retirement. For everyone else.
hypothetically. Hypothetically. Yeah.
Speaking of things that are unreasonable, it's pretty tough.
You don't like that time frame, huh?
I
Yeah.
don't like that time frame at all.
So,
I think I'll talk maybe for Brad and a couple others. Working with the data that's not 100% accurate, right? And then with the organization expecting it to be 100% accurate when there's not much you can do about it, right?
Yeah.
So I think that causes moral distress in that, it's directionally right. You can learn a lot from it, but people say it's wrong because it's 5% wrong.
Yeah.
Right? So.
yeah, go ahead.
In my job during the COVID, like identifying patients and then having people tell me, Parkview's just loading numbers, Parkview's doing this,
Oh,
doing
yeah.
that,
Yeah.
and I'm like, that's coming from my team.
Yeah.
And knowing that we're not doing that, but everyone's reporting that, not just Parkview, but all work, they're over-reporting to give them more reimbursement.
Yeah. Yeah, and from my area, so chaplains respond to every death. So where I was during COVID, it was you guys are talking to the doctors and asking them to put COVID on the death certificate so Parkview gets more money.
Exactly.
It's like, and that's a character accusation, right? First of all, this is going off to the side just a little bit. We do not accept character accusations in any scenario ever, right? You're not ever allowed to, in my opinion, we talk about this even in our family, to just say you're deceiving for money. That's a character. That's not an accusation of data. That's to say you want to get more money and you're willing to lie to get it. That's not acceptable, and certainly falls into this realm. Probably in between these two, right? It's certainly distressing, maybe is injurious. Where when you see those reports come out and you think, like you said, that's my team that's putting those numbers together, that could go all the way to moral injury. Moral distress occurs when you take or witness an action that violates your personal values. And your personal values are your personal values. We're not talking about universal values. We're not talking even here about quality standards. We're talking about what's important to you. What's important to you comes from a variety of places, right? It can come from your family of origin, can come from your religion, can come from your culture, can come from your personality. This is my personality. I think these things are important. Some of us haven't paid a lot of attention to what we actually value, and if you haven't, here's a way to tell what you actually value. When do you get really angry? When you're at work and something goes a certain way and you just feel that anger, even if you don't lash out, you don't show it at all, you're just kind of stuffing it and stifling it. Much easier to do when you're a remote team, right? You can stuff it, stifle it. When you feel that anger rise up, you know that there's a value inside of you that's being violated. When these things are sudden or profound, or they endure, it can be like getting hit with a truck, because you all of a sudden you realize not only is there a news story saying we're bloating the numbers, my sister-in-law also believes it. It was your sister. Yeah, it was my brother-in-law for me at a family Christmas get-together. We're sitting down and he says, well, I know because I talked to somebody in healthcare that every time you guys say somebody died from COVID, you get $40,000. I said, you're basically trying to say that the literally 1,000 of doctors, about 1,000 doctors, all got together and agreed on something for the first time in history. And then they said, it is worth it to risk our careers to get $40,000 for Parkview. That's crazy. But it told me, and no matter what I said to him, because again, it was my team works with the death certificates. We don't sign the death certificates, but my team worked with those death certificates. So it felt very much like this is a personal attack, very sudden. Or you feel like this is the way this always happens. Every time I do this, this is the response, and it violates those values that I've got, and it's super frustrating. So there are some work stress things that are just frustrating just because they're frustrating. But then there's those other things that violate things that are important to you, and when they happen like a dripping faucet on a regular basis, they can cause moral injury as well. Burnout. We use the word burnout a lot. I'm burned out. Sometimes we just mean I'm tired, I'm stressed, I've had a long day, I'm frustrated. The dog is being irritating, my family and I got into it, whatever. But these are the three characteristics of burnout. The first is emotional exhaustion. Emotional exhaustion is that soul level weariness. It's not physical, it's emotional, it's spiritual. It's the sort of exhaustion that when you take a good vacation and you come back to work, you still feel this deep level of emotional exhaustion. It's the sort of exhaustion that doesn't go away when a project actually goes right. It doesn't go away when you have a good night's sleep. It doesn't go away with a good weekend. It just sticks with you all the time. The second is depersonalization or cynicism. Now, I worry when I put cynicism up that some people read that like sarcasm and they think that I'm talking about sarcasm. I think sarcasm, we've used quite a bit of that already today. So if that's an indication that we're burned out, some of us are definitely burned out in the room. Sarcasm can illuminate truth. Cynicism is when you believe things will never improve. So when you are cynical and you think things will never improve, this is the way it's always going to be. That's a signal that you may be in a place of burnout. And then the last, and you guys have actually hinted at this quite a lot already, that sense of I'm not making the difference that I feel like I'm here to make. Maybe I felt like I was in the past, but I'm not now. And so that what I'm trying to contribute, what I'm trying to offer, I feel like is either no one cares about it, no one's paying attention to it, or I just don't have the energy to even really give my best work anymore. So the amount that I feel like I'm contributing, if you notice the pause there, you probably are around younger people more often. They don't usually use the word cares in that place when you've run out of cares to give, and you just don't really care anymore. Incidentally, before we go on, what usually happens to these people? They are blamed. What is wrong with you? Why don't you seem to care anymore? You used to be so engaged. You used to make such a difference. And now look at you, you're like a shell of yourself. What's going on? You know what you need to do is have some self-care. And you're blamed for it instead of helped through it. So examples, you might feel trapped, hopeless, like you're just sarcastic all the time. It's like the only option. Just that numb sort of going through this. About a year into the pandemic, about a quarter of healthcare coworkers had quit already at that point. Most of them saying they're quitting because of the burnout experience they're experiencing. This is current. About 2.7 million U.S. nurses report feeling burned out. To put it in perspective, if you take everybody that works in healthcare in the United States, those burned out nurses represent 15% of the entire population of healthcare workers. And so why are we talking about nurses? Because they're the ones that intersect with what you're doing, right? They're sort of the backbone of what we do in healthcare. About 25% of nurses have been experiencing some level of burnout symptoms, things like stress, anxiety, depression, other forms of emotional exhaustion. CIO magazine, this is from a pretty recent article, says 44% of full-time IT workers experiencing burnout. It's hard to find exact stats on your exact profession, but being remote early on seemed to help alleviate burnout. And as time's gone on, it's sort of leveled out to where it could actually be a contributor to burnout or something that helps you to avoid burnout, either one. So if it's 44% for this group, that's a lot of you, right? That's a lot of people sitting in seats in this room in the Access Center on a Tuesday afternoon who are feeling at least some level of burnout. Now, burnout, like other things, is a spectrum, right? So you can be at a lot of different places. But mathematically, if that's anywhere close to accurate, let's just be conservative and say that means 20 of you, 18 of you are experiencing burnout. Let's go ahead and go through this example, even though we've done a few already. So it's a clinical example based on many clinical examples that we had, clinical cases we had going through the ethics committee. So we had a patient years ago, pre-COVID. It was elderly, just frail, just not in a healthy state, necrosis of the brain. So she wasn't brain dead, but parts of her brain tissue were dying and had died. She'd been diagnosed fairly recently with metastasized cancer through her body. They knew she had one spot. When she came into the hospital, unfortunately, they found it was sort of everywhere. This patient had been in our ICU for weeks, not able to talk or interact in any sort of meaningful way with the staff or with her family. She had multiple organs that were shutting down, and of course she was vent dependent. She had to be on that ventilator to breathe. So before I go on, put yourself in the shoes of a clinical provider for this patient. And then I'll fill in the rest of it that this patient was a full code. Meaning that if her pulses stopped, the care team would need to rush in, do chest compressions, artificial respiration, would need to continue working with the vents, medicines, that sort of thing. If you're taking care of a patient that matches this description, and you know you may have to perform CPR, what sort of feelings would you have? Stress?
Not wanting to do it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna break a lot of ribs.
Yeah.
Yes.
So to go back to our values conversation, so you're expecting to break a lot of ribs. But the value, what's the value you may have that violates, right? So what value might that caretaker have that she or he feels like they're transgressing if they go and break those ribs?
Do no harm.
Yeah, do no harm. The patient suffering, absolutely. So if you had to put as precise a word as possible, I hear precision is part of your skill set, right? So we'll tap into that here. So if you had to be you disagree with that? Okay. If you had to be as precise as possible about the feeling that you would have in this scenario. Futility, yeah. Say again?
Despair.
Oh, despair, yeah. Yeah, despair, futility, yeah, those go hand in hand.
Doom.
Say again?
Doom.
Doom, oh gosh, that's a good word. I don't think I've ever heard doom described for this, but yeah, absolutely. What else might you feel?
Conflicted.
Okay, tell me about conflicted. What's conflicting there?
Well,
because you have to follow the rules, right? Because the code is that she's a full code. That's the order set from the doctor saying that if her heart stops, we're going to do CPR.
Really wish they had done something.
Yeah, you and me both. Can you think of, and I think you've already mentioned some of these, but you would have a finer understanding of this than I do. Can you think of a parallel example in your world? We got patient care on the one hand, and something causing that conflict on the other.
Required delivery date with not enough time.
Okay. How's that similar to this?
Well, it's something that you need to deliver, but it's going to be near impossible to do it within the time frame.
So you feel like what you're giving, like they're giving CPR, is not going to actually match the situation because of the expected delivery date. Okay. Hearing that.
Legacy code or development of some kind that has to keep being updated again and again. We really just need to let it die.
Okay. So
Resuscitated.
it's on life support. I don't think I need to ask any follow-up questions about that. I think I see the parallel there. It just needs to let it die. Yeah. Is it necessary to be serious about our finances and get reimbursed? Yeah, it is, right? Like it matters to get reimbursed. When it feels like other things are being compromised because of that, that's when we get into that place of moral distress. So this patient unfortunately did code in the clinical sense. Her heart stopped, and she received CPR in the middle of the night for 47 minutes. The only family member there overnight that night was her granddaughter, who was a young adult, who lacked authority to make any different decision for her. Again, back to advanced care planning, the state had decided, the state statute indicated that this woman's daughters were the ones with authority, of course, not her granddaughter. So if a daughter was in the room, she would have had authority to say, I know we've asked for CPR, we'd like to stop. The granddaughter did not have that authority. So a phone call, of course, was made to the daughters, but they're not standing there watching it. And so they stuck with their original decision to have her be coded. Her ribs were breaking, cracking. And back to the word futility and doom, even if this code had been successful, say that her heart had started beating again, have we resolved anything for her? No. She still has metastasized cancer. She still has dead brain tissue. She still has her organs shutting down. So to the point of futility, it would have been futile to do that. The granddaughter, I'm sure, still has some sort of PTSD from watching. It's one thing. She was always going to have grief. She didn't have to have trauma along with the grief, but because of this decision, she did. The nurses involved, the care techs, the physicians, the respiratory therapists, I'm sure some of them still see these images in their mind. So this is moral injury instead of moral distress. And that I recommended after a lot of thought and what felt like a lot of time, but of course in 2020 a day felt like it lasted for about 4 months, so probably wasn't as much time as it felt like, but I recommended that we discontinue visitors. So I was taking an action in violation of my own values, because my value says, it's important, call the family, get them in here, friends, partners, we want them to be together while this person's in the hospital. And then I'm saying, what, instead of doing that, let's make a rule that says none of them can come in. And so that's distressing and was necessary. I still believe, probably given what I knew at the time and what the rest of us and the rest of the world knew at the time, would make a similar recommendation. But that doesn't mean that I feel good about it. So there's those times too, right? That this is the right decision to make, but it still hurts deeply as you make it. We feel this because we are human beings, because we are caring people. We care about our work, we care about the patient outcome, we care about what's happening in our community. We cannot turn this off. When we do turn this off, obviously our quality of our work diminishes, but the quality of our lives diminish as well. More of a conversation, but first of all, I want to remind you that these experiences are unfair. They're unjust. They happen to good people who are put into difficult situations over and over. So these situations you've described of not having the time frame, not having good data, not having people listen to what the data and the recommendations are, these are distressing things that you experience because you want to do good work, and then you're put into these difficult situations over and over. Some potential stressors, of course, we've talked about workload, turnover. I don't know what that's been like in your department, but in a lot of areas, that turnover and having new people or having old people that aren't there anymore, that you can't rely on anymore. That perceived or real instability, whether it's just that sense of things aren't as sure as they used to be, things aren't as stable as they used to be, whether you're just feeling that or whether it's very, very real and it's happening right in your face. Those can be additional stressors. The emotional strain, the scope of work, and the mantra that comes to all of us from time to time: do more with less. So less time, less resources, less coworkers sometimes in the department, but yet the work continues to increase. So these are default system stressors, the ones that we've just talked about. These are, for a long time I wanted to think that when I was experiencing moral distress, that there was some evil leader behind the curtain, just pulling all the little wires to make sure that it was, they're pursuing evil and I'm pursuing good. It's like the old trope of all the movies you've ever watched. You're trying to do the good thing, and so somebody must be trying to it's not, there's nobody behind the curtain. Like, it's just the way the system goes. There are system stressors. These things, could you point to any one person and say that it's that person's fault? Maybe for little instances of these, but not for the pervasive nature at which they're at for most of us in our work. Contributors to burnout, we talked about isolation, that perfectionism, that idea that I don't have enough time to perfect it, and yet somebody else expects it to be perfect, and so how do I put it together during that time? Monotony, that drone. Some of us like monotony. Some of us like, this is not me actually, but some of you maybe like to kind of do the same thing every day. But if that's not good for you, that can contribute to burnout. Those blurred boundaries. What's my responsibility? What's your responsibility? That communication that you talked about earlier, and then just that concern of accuracy, regulations, etc. So let's talk about what if we don't address moral distress and burnout. So the Surgeon General has actually issued a warning. You remember how big a deal that was? Well, some of you are too young to remember. The Surgeon General's warning when it showed up on packages of cigarettes, and that was a big deal that it was on there. Well, he's issued another warning. This time it's about healthcare coworker burnout. So I guess every job offer in healthcare now should have a little Surgeon General's warning on the side saying, may cause burnout, moral distress, compromised values, misunderstood expectations, that sort of thing. But the white paper that he put out projects a shortage of up to 140,000 physicians just 9 years from now. Has anybody had a hard time getting into a doctor in the past few years? Yeah, it's not super easy right now, and we live in a pretty fortunate, privileged area, and you're Parkview coworkers, so that should make it a little bit easier than for most people. It's already hard to find a doctor. It will become more difficult. 92% of acute care nurses during the pandemic said this is going to shorten how long I'm going to stay a nurse. 92%. That's a huge percentage of nurses. So even if some of those are right about their prediction, having fewer nurses is going to make that bedside care all the more difficult. Qualitatively, so that's the quantitative. The qualitative, you're going to have coworkers who are just less engaged. Like I said, if you're burned out, it's really hard to care. It's really hard to care about your work and continue to do that work. That lack of empathy, which is the cornerstone for healthcare, right? Cornerstone for healthcare is empathy and compassion for the person who comes in to the hospital or to the doctor's office. Higher costs, we know that when we're disengaged, we make more mistakes because we're not paying as much attention, we're not as mindful, and so those costs go up. PTSD, depression, absenteeism, and suicide. So this is a cautionary tale. This is Ashley Ashley was a pharmacist at a CVS during the pandemic. If you know anything about CVS, they've had a lot of issues over the last several years keeping their coworkers, especially with their physicians, and really kind of what we've talked about, some processes that were unhealthy for the coworkers, some expectations that were unhealthy for the coworkers. So Ashley Anderson, her store was 1,000 prescriptions behind. I've never worked in a pharmacy. I don't know if that's like a huge number or something more normal. Seems like that's a huge number. It seems like a huge number to me to be behind. I can't imagine working there and knowing you're 1,000 prescriptions behind, because usually when you get a prescription, you need to get it pretty quickly. And there's all sorts of rules, understandably, about the pharmacist needs to always be available. And so at the desk, if there's just one pharmacist there that day, you can't just walk away and not be available to the clients, the customers when they come in. They were short-staffed, so they're working longer hours, doing more with less, like we talked about before. Ashley was a pretty young person, but she was having signs of a heart attack when she started her shift one day. In fact, she texted her boyfriend and said, this is what I'm experiencing. He, of course, said, you need to leave. You need to go down the street to the hospital and be seen. And she said, well, though I know I do. I've contacted my leader, but I can't just walk away because the job expectation is that there needs to be a pharmacist here. She never made it to the hospital because she delayed. You could say that's on her, certainly, but we know these systems work on us, don't they? They play in our minds. They make us do things or not do things that we would normally do or not do. So these things impacted her to the point where she didn't go down the street just about a mile to the local hospital. She eventually collapsed. The ambulances arrived, and she was already dead. I read this story in some of my research about burnouts and just the impacts that it can make. But what I didn't realize until the end of the story was it actually happened here in Indiana, in Seymour, Indiana, where my wife is from. I've been in that CVS countless times. The hospital she would have gone to is the one where my first son was born, and they would have been able to take care of her, and she would probably be alive today. You may already know that the occupation with the highest suicide rate is physician. You'd think, well, they've got it all, right? They've got the money, the smarts, the job security, the authority. No, the pressure that's on them leads them to be the highest occupation with the highest suicide rate. So let's talk about two paths. This is a bright, cheery topic, huh? Aren't you so glad we're talking about this right after lunch in a warm room? So organizational steps. What are things that organizations, leaders can do to help coworkers avoid burnout? The first one is giving them an opportunity to opt out. Even within what you do, I know that there's certain things that put more stress on you and other things that put less stress on you. And there's times that your life is churned up in a way that makes it harder to produce the result that you usually produce. And so are there times that a leader, and I'm looking at the leaders, I guess, at this point, a leader could say, look, I realize we've heaped a lot on your plate, or I realize, hey, you're coming back from maternity leave, or hey, I realize you have a close family member who's just diagnosed with a disorder, something like that. So for this one time, we're going to give you an opportunity to just say, I can't do that right now. In America, that sounds insane. To look at a coworker and say, you don't have to do your work right now. Other countries, it seems insane to never let anybody have an opportunity to opt out. There's more understanding in other places, by and large, than there is in the United States. Second option is a timeout. So if we can't opt out, we've got to get the work done. Can we take a timeout? And what I don't mean by timeout is to say, we're going to take a week where we don't work on our projects. That's not what I mean by timeout. But say there's been a project that's been heavy on a team of 2 or a team of 25, and it's kind of just kicked everybody's butts. Afterwards, can we say, let's just take a timeout for 2 minutes, realize this was hard, this was heavy, this was maybe not fair to you and what you were asked to do, maybe that wasn't really fair. Let's acknowledge that, because acknowledgement is about 90% of recovering and surviving in burnout. And being able to say it out loud. I'm afraid that a lot of times leaders are afraid if we say it out loud that people will be like, you're damn right, that was too bad. I can't believe you're making me do this. What is wrong with you people? But what really happens when we say, that was really tough and I'm really sorry you had to do that, is most of the time that coworker will appreciate being acknowledged, that the distress was recognized, and that there was just that moment to say, I'm sorry, that was how that went. It's not going to fix everything, but it is necessary. And then third of all, this is really the key of the seven steps I'm going to give you for organizations and for leaders. This is really number one. So for the leaders in the room, I'm gonna say this out loud, which means your direct reports are going to know you heard this. Okay, so for the leaders in the room, if during your one-on-ones you're talking 80% of the time, you're doing it wrong. If during your department meetings it's just a blast of information from the leader, maybe reconsider how there can be some feedback loops there. I am certain that many of you have been through very difficult work seasons, and some of you during that difficult work season had a leader who listened, a leader who cared, and it changed the impact of that work season dramatically. I'm sure that some of you have had the opposite, a really difficult season of work, and your leader couldn't be bothered to listen to anything. Showed up to your meetings late, didn't remember things that you had told her or him the last time around, and you just felt as though they never really listened to you. All the research on burnout says the number one way to avoid it is for our coworkers to perceive that the organization supports them. The number one way for us to feel as though the organization supports us is to have leaders who care about us, leaders who listen to us, leaders who aren't just blasting information to us all the time, but that are listening to what's going on. I'm burned out and our team is short-staffed and we don't have enough resources and we don't have enough money, and you show up with a gratitude journal, I'm going to shove it down your throat. Because that's not going to resolve all the systemic issues that are going on and where I'm at. Now, there are, like I said, there are good studies that show an improvement in coworker engagement, but I would say that usually we notice well-being programs when they're missing, when there's nothing there. This organization is not doing anything to try to help us with our stress and that sort of thing. So the yoga class is not going to resolve your burnout, but the absence of a yoga class or some other support systems is going to be a signal to coworkers that the organization to say things are going wrong. And to funnel that up. That doesn't always mean it's going to be resolved, but for you to know that there's a safe way for me to say these things are going wrong, then also helps with that psychological safety for more personal things. And then I think this is super key. What we eventually did in the chaplaincy department when we would hire a new chaplain, which we had a team of about 25, when we'd hire a new chaplain, we'd have a mentor for them. Somebody that wasn't their leader, wasn't their trainer, they didn't have any formal responsibility, but just somebody to sit down with. Now, sometimes those relationships took off and it was great. Other times it was like, okay, we did the obligatory, 4 meetings or whatever, and then we went on. But some sort of sense that there's people that we can count on, people that we can talk to about what we're experiencing is a huge deal. So just a little bit about my story, and then we'll get into the personal recovery path. So, as I said, I worked for Parkview for a little over 10 years. In the fall of 2022, that emotional exhaustion that I described was definitely where I was. Even after time off and coming back to work, just couldn't really get engaged the way I was before. We've already talked about the pandemic a little bit. During the 2.5 years of the pandemic, my team responded to 5,563 patient deaths. A team of 22 people responded to those deaths in a 2.5 year period. There was leadership conflict there, which is kind of like duh, right, in the middle of a pandemic with all these things going on. Some of that leadership conflict was my fault. Other parts of it were not my fault. Meetings on weekends, the pervasive nature of healthcare, being on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, disrupting my family life, my personal life. Maybe some of you did this too. I was on Facebook, of course. My generation loves Facebook, so I know it's kind of going out of vogue now, but my generation loves Facebook. As the pandemic got going and I started to see some of these things that people were saying on Facebook about the vaccine or the hospitals or the virus and the political nature of things, it was too triggering for me, so I had to step away from social media. So of course that fed some of that isolation as well. So fast forward, really after the pandemic had kind of come and gone, to my 44th birthday. This is me and 3 of our 4 kiddos. We're going to Casa Grande Mexican Grill. Anybody else like Casa Grande here in Fort Wayne? Okay. We call
Makes everything better.
Queso makes everything better. What's the saying? They say you can't buy happiness, but I've never been sad at a Mexican restaurant. So we were at the Mexican restaurant. I'm wearing my green jeans, which I think is super stylish. My daughter disagrees. So she didn't get a dress. It was my birthday, so I got to dress myself for our outing instead of her dressing me. But even at this point, I knew that something had changed and something was going wrong inside of me. And so then this is also my 44th birthday. When I woke up that morning, before my feet hit the floor, I knew my heart was doing something different that it had never done before. And so, of course, with that going on, we went out to Mexican, had a good time for my birthday. About 2:30 in the afternoon, my watch finally was like, okay, enough's enough, and sent me an alert saying, you may be experiencing AFib. It's like, okay, well, I guess I can't ignore it any longer, pretend it's not happening. So we live across the street from PRMC. This was Labor Day as well, so it was a day off for my kids, day off for me. My 44th birthday, we drove across the street, went into the emergency department. I think the doctors really love it when you say, actually, my smartwatch diagnosed my condition before I arrived. But they hooked me up, obviously, to the EKG and all that, which agreed with what my smartwatch had said, that I was in a persistent, irregular heart rhythm for the first time in my life. So the doctor looks over at me and says, what we do for people in your situation is we cardiovert you. Now, I like to say that I'm healthcare adjacent, so I know some things about healthcare, but I'm not a clinical person. I was not familiar with what cardioversion was. Is anybody here familiar with what cardioversion? Okay, so it would have. You were a cardiac. So this would have made more sense to you when you heard it. So I said, what's that? He says, that's where we shock you. Like you see the paddles. I said, then that's why I said like the paddles. He said, well, we don't use the paddles anymore. It's a patch on the front, a patch on the back, hook you up to the crash cart. Well, as being at Codes over the years, I knew what the crash cart was and how that went. But I went to the Mexican restaurant like 2.5 hours ago, right? Like I don't need to be shocked. So I actually thought he was joking. I thought he was messing with me. He knew I was a coworker, and I thought he was. So I said, "You're joking, right?" And he had no sense of humor whatsoever. So he was not joking, and he informed me, "I am not joking. This is what we're about to do to you." He said, so what we usually do is we float you along, give you some sedation, shock you, hopefully your heart goes back in rhythm. I said, what are some of the possible outcomes? He's like, your heart could go back in rhythm. It could not respond well to the shock. You could end up in the cath lab. And having worked in healthcare for a long time, I knew that you could go from the ED to the cath lab to the ICU, and some patients, of course, then proceed to the morgue at that point as well. So I knew this was a starting point that had many different possible destinations. I said, well, tell me about you float most people along. He said, well, honestly, most of the time when we shock somebody, they're minimally conscious. We don't have to worry about sedation. They're not having a conversation about cardioversion before it happens. He said, so, but when you are in this state, you don't want to remember this, so we're going to put you under beforehand. I said, is it counterindicated? I used one of my big words I knew from the clinical world. I said, is it counterindicated? In other words, is it going to, if I don't take the sedation, am I going to have a worse outcome? And he said, no, if anything, you'll probably go home sooner if you don't take the sedation. At which point the respiratory therapist that was in the room looked at me like, you have got to be kidding me that you're thinking about taking this without sedation, because I think she knew I'm going to have to jump in while you're wide awake, if something doesn't go quite right. So I said, well, let's give it a shot. Give it a shot. I'm up for a shocking experience. So they come in, shave my chest. Nothing says I'm the chairperson of the ethics committee like having a 19-year-old shave your chest with like a razor from 1947, And then the goo and the stick and all of that, crash cart comes in. Now, I'm familiar with healthcare. Things usually take quite a while. You're waiting, that sort of thing. I'm thinking there's a cardiologist at some point that's going to come by. And then all of a sudden I realize I am now currently attached to the crash cart. And the doctor brings everybody in the room. I think some of them were there for the procedure. Others were there for voyeuristic purposes. We've got a department director about to take cardioversion without sedation. Let's go see what happens here. So the room fills up, and the doctor says, the computer is going to choose when you get this level of shock. It's going to be 225 joules to your chest. and then he stands back, and I wasn't quite prepared. I knew what he's going to say next was coming. I wasn't quite ready for it at that point. He says, "Clear." Okay, no cardiologist is coming by. We're doing this now. And then he says again, "Clear." And without any sedation, 255 joules. Actually, he must have given me just a little bit extra because he said 225. But clearly I have evidence here. It was 255 joules in through my chest. Say again?
The monitor decides within a range the joules as well.
See, I like the story that he just wanted to shock me more. Like, that's much more interesting than than an algorithm and everything. So, as you can see, those of you that are smarter than me with telemetry strips, my heart fortunately did go back into rhythm and has actually stayed there for the 2 years since that point in time. But following everything that had happened, all the work stress, the burnout that I was experiencing, my body was telling me something's not right. So the first time, and I know I'm a privileged person to get to 44 years old and not have had a mental health diagnosis, but we do have to pay attention when things happen to us for the first time, right? When this is new, I'm experiencing something that I've never experienced before. So AFib was new, and then my diagnosis of depression and anxiety was new. To go back to your comment earlier, Rashid, about like how do we help people to make sure that they feel safe, saying that they're struggling. I would not be able to report that I felt safe to do that during this time. I wish that I could say that. Many times in my career I would have felt safe to do that. I did not feel that way at that time. And so I worked with my doctor instead of with my leader. And my doctor signed the papers for some intermittent FMLA so I could take that time off without fear of retribution from a leader at that point. So I think that to flip that for a leader that wants to be supportive, to say to you, FMLA is an option for you in those times is really important and really valuable. But burnout had taken its toll, and the way I would really kind of key in on that is my role, my sense of identity had changed pretty significantly. And the job that I'd loved for so long was killing me. I don't think I'm unique. So let's talk about the personal path. Personal path, we have to begin by identifying it. This is actually the hardest step. Being able to say to ourselves or someone that cares about us, I'm not okay. I'm in a place of burnout. I'm not sure I can go on. Everything feels like it's piling up on me. So we're going back to expectations. So now we're talking about internal expectations. What are my internal expectations of myself? Because my internal expectations of myself in 2015 might have been reasonable, and in 2022 might not be as reasonable as they were before. So for those of you in this room who you have high expectations of yourself, it's time to maybe evaluate those. If you feel like you're edging closer to burnout, to say, is it reasonable for me? Because we can escape the expectations of our coworkers, we can escape the expectations of our clients, even of our leader, but we can never escape the expectations we place on ourselves. So evaluating those is the first step. Sometimes you have to stop working so hard. You have to decrease your focus, decrease your intensity. To say, these are the one or two things I'm going to try to accomplish today, whether that's at work or personally, instead of saying, I'm going to get it all done. I'm going to do it all in one day. I'm just going to knock it all out in this unreasonable time frame. To turn down the dial of focus and intensity. Number 3, give attention to your nervous system. So I'm going to ask a question. It might take a little bravery if this is an affirmative answer for you. Does anyone in here practice nervous system exercises? Nobody that wants to talk about it in front of their coworkers. That's good. So we're going to do it now. So what I'd like for you to do, if you have glasses on, to take your glasses off for just a minute. So you're going to, if some of you can't do it, you're like, oh, this is, can't do it. And then you're going to put those fingers on either side of your ear, so 2 behind, 2 in front. And then you're just going to gently rub. You're going to keep your head kind of still and upright, and then just gently rub. And you're doing both. You're rubbing that space in front of your ear and then behind your ear. So just take a second. I'm going to be quiet for just a moment, and just gently, you're not trying to work anything out. This isn't a massage, but just a little bit of attention here. And while you're doing that, be mindful that you have this vagus nerve that runs through your whole body that presents itself at certain places. Maybe close your eyes even for a second and focus on that nerve that runs through your body. And realize that that nerve is what controls your fight or flight response. And when it's on all the time, as it might be when you're forced to be extroverted in a room with other people for a day when you're used to being at home and working on your computer, that could be, it could be overstimulated. All right, you can stop. Anybody feel anything as I did that? If not, just pretend you did, so I'll feel better that we took the time to do the exercise. You feel anything as a result of that? So actually, the connection between stress in my life, which was partially work, partially personal, led directly to the medical diagnosis and the experience that I had. So this is a wonderful creator, Suki Baxter. If that seems like something that might be helpful to you, you might jot her name down. I'm not saying I don't know enough about the nervous system to recommend her, but I will say she's been helpful to me as I've started to practice some of these and be more aware that just like we're worried about our cardiac health or our lungs or something like that, our nervous system is something that needs attention as well. Things can change at any time. In fact, let's repeat that one together. So I'll say it and then you say it. So it'll be a repeat after me. Things can change at any time.
Things can change at any time.
Is that true? Yeah, absolutely. Didn't say things will change at any time. Things can change at any time. Do things change? Yeah. But when we're trapped, when we feel trapped, when we feel hopeless, when we feel robotic, like we're in that place of burnout, it feels like this is the way things are always going to be. Depression feels like that, right? Anxiety can feel like that. It can tell us that this is the way things are always going to be. But it's not true. Things will change. They may not change in your exact preferred way, but they are going to change. So that mantra of things can change at any time. Do any of you have a mantra that has helped you in the past you keep coming back to? Yeah.
This one sounds counterintuitive, but I'll explain it. Things worth doing are worth doing poorly. So what that would mean is, like, if it's worth it to work out, as an example, but you can't commit to doing, say, a full workout, then it's worth doing something.
Yeah. So get started, sort of mantra. Yeah, I like that. That's not what I expected the last word to be. I thought I was going to be doing it well, but go ahead.
I tell this to my husband because he and I tend to be yin-yang. When he's glass half empty, I try to be glass half full. So I'll say outlook is everything. So your lens of how you view a situation can drastically impact your feelings or how it impacts you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's good. Yeah.
I have two. For my daughters, I say be a shiner, not a whiner.
Okay. A shiner, not a whiner.
One,
Yeah.
if I'm in a...
How do they like that? How does that go when you tell them that?
Oh, they're 3 and 5. So.
Oh, okay. So,
we're working on it.
yeah. So maybe better in the future.
My husband hates it. But my other one, I kind of laugh at myself. Obviously, I would never act on it, but I'm like, I didn't doubt, punch him out. So if somebody looks
Yeah, she does it.
on a meeting that's frustrating or something, or personal, I just say it to myself, or sometimes out loud. But
Yeah.
and it just.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
Like my granddaughters say, sharing is caring.
Oh,
That mantra.
Okay, good.
Peace is worth protecting.
Your peace is worth protecting, yeah. Something that reminds you have value in the situation as well, not just the others, yeah. Progress, not perfection, yeah. Was it Craig Rochelle's got that good enough to move on? Oh, I love that. Like, okay, is this good enough to move on? Have I done a good enough job that I can just go ahead and move on now instead of trying to continue to make it perfect? Any others? Yeah. The coffee, not the grounds. What does that mean? I've never heard that.
Keep the good stuff, let the bad stuff go.
Okay. Kind of the opposite of the baby in the bathwater sort of illustration. Okay. Yeah, good.
Nothing is end of
Yeah, nothing is the end of the world. Failure is not fatal, right?
nothing is end of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, put in that broader perspective of, yeah, I'm frustrated about this today, but it's not the end of the world. Good. This too shall pass. My wife Kristen likes, I've survived 100% of my worst days. You know, I've made it this far, not to minimize how much you've done to get to this point. And then last but not least, of course, confiding in one or two trusted people. When we're burned out, what we tend to do is one of two things. We tell everybody about it. We complain. We're a whiner, not a shiner, right? So either we tell everybody who's willing to hold still for a little bit about how awful everything is and how burned out we are and how messed up this whole department and health system and whatever else is, or we make the opposite mistake and we just keep it to ourselves and we don't talk to anybody. And so nobody knows how we're really struggling. And so I would say that the more healthy approach is to find one or two people, a therapist, a trusted friend, a trusted colleague, to open your heart to say, this is really weighing heavily on me. And that's on us, right? It's on us to take that step. And when we think of ourselves as strong and capable and that sort of thing, that can be an obstacle to opening up to those people. Thoughts about those 7 steps before we wrap up?
I would say it's sometimes being remote, it's hard to, if you're in person, sometimes you can really see that somebody's trying, and it's a lot easier to hide that when you're remote.
Yeah.
Either you're not coming on camera or whatever, but I think it's those cues aren't as obvious there.
Yeah.
So
I think it almost puts more onus on the individual coworker, right? Because, like you said, it's hard to pick up on because you're not face to face, and so unfortunately puts more on that coworker that's stressed to say, I'm gonna have to raise my hand and say, I'm not doing okay, which is hard. It's hard to do that at that point.
maybe look for the signs of. Maybe it's also important for us to look for the signs, not just as leaders, but as peers and coworkers, just to ask, is everyone doing okay? Are you doing okay?
And paying attention to work sometimes, right? If their work starts to not be the same quality usually as we go to performance right away, you're not performing at the same level. Maybe it's worth asking the question, help me understand, is there something going on here that, you knew the deadline was X and you didn't get it in time, or you knew the expectation was Y and you didn't fulfill that? Help me understand what's going on that's keeping you from doing that, instead of snapping right to you didn't perform, either as a colleague or as a leader, but going to what's going on, help me understand. So the final step, self-forgiveness, because when we violate these values that we have, we're the ones that feel it. We're the ones that own it. So if you take my example of being one of the ones that recommended we have no visitors during COVID, I feel badly about that. In fact, if I dwell on that too much, I could feel ashamed about that. I could feel so guilty that it really drives me crazy. But if I can forgive myself for having to do that. Now again, I think I probably would make the same decision again because of where we were at the time, but that doesn't mean that I feel good about it. So if I can forgive myself for what I did at that time, I get to actually keep my values, which is really nice. I could say it's still a value of mine that people are able to support their loved ones at the hospital. That's still a value of mine, and because that's a value of mine, I feel badly about recommending something that was the opposite, but I can forgive myself, and the second thing that it does is it affirms my value. I'm going to maintain my values. I still think it's important that people have the support they need at the hospital, but I also can carry forth my value by forgiving myself for what I did. So if you have your phone with you, if this was helpful to you, if you wouldn't mind pulling your phone out, this QR code is going to take you to a Google form. That's just a quick review of how things went. Get out of the way so you can actually see it. I'm going to take you to a Google form that will be a little review. Usually takes you 2 minutes or less to fill that out and let me know what was helpful, what was good, what could be improved for next time. That's also going to, I'm going to send you 2 PDFs within the next week. One is going to summarize the organizational path that we went through to avoid burnout. The second one's going to summarize what we just talked about, that personal path to recovery. So instead of trying to remember what we talked about today or sort through a slide deck at some point in time, you'll have both of those as PDFs within the next week here. So I'll shut up for just a second while you do that, and then we'll close here. Your dignity, your value as a human being has not changed at all. We can get in that place where we get in our heads when we're not able to do what we're used to being able to do, and we start to tell ourselves stories that our identity has changed, that our value to our team, our family, our community, our friends has changed. But the truth is that moral distress, burnout, can't take away anything from what you're worth. Can't diminish your dignity at all, can't remove your worth and your value at all. So just as a reminder, the 2 paths, I label them both as number 1. I think that's probably appropriate, that we have an organizational responsibility to help people, and then there's ways that we can recover personally as well. If we're not connected on LinkedIn, I know I found some of you before coming today, but if we're not connected on LinkedIn, I'd be happy to connect on there. I post things almost every day about burnout and recovery and plans and that sort of thing. Love to hear from you. So Rashid, thank you, and Kelly, thank you for the invite today.
Thank you for coming.
Any
This was really amazing.
final thoughts, questions? I know we've gone over already, but we've had a great discussion, and so I really blame it on you that we've gone over on time so much, because you've had such a great conversation. Put the QR code back up. There you go. Gotta flip it open first. Your razor. Oh, yeah.
So if someone comes to you and says, I'm burnout,
Yeah.
and you're the receiver of that, you're one of the two trusted people, like, how do you help?
Yeah. Are you in the scenario your friend, colleague, leader?
All three.
Yeah, I think for all three. So the question was, if you're one of those one or two trusted friends, how do you respond if somebody comes to you? I think the first thing is to realize it's going to take a long time. It's going to take a long time to recover. The experts say 2 to 3 years is what it takes to recover. And that is, even that statistic is sort of slanted towards people who leave their jobs, because of course recovery happens differently if you leave your job than if you stay, and I kind of did both. But I think the reality that if your nervous system is totally shot, you don't do a couple exercises or go to a couple appointments and it's fixed. It's just not the way it works. If depression and anxiety has crept in, it's not going to be resolved just by you listening well one time. It's like being sick with anything else. You've got to put things in place for a long time to recover. So that would be the first thing I would say, is just be willing to stick with them for the long haul. And then the second thing I would say is get them screened for depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation right away. Let's cross that off to make sure those aren't the things that are going on before we go on to talking about a bucket list or some of those other pieces. Yeah.
When you talk about having one or two people that you're close to, say that you're filling a role for someone else,
Yeah.
and they're after the suicidal ideation, like you're not trained to try to help them. What should you do?
Yeah.
Escalate that.
I get them to somebody that is as quickly as possible. So that could be the ER. That's the ER is sort of the broadsword for all mental health stuff. Randalia, PRMC, if you're here locally, get them into one of those facilities. They have a lot of screening tools that go beyond just, I'm hearing you as a friend and I care about you. They're going to do the formal screenings to see what's going on. If they need intervention right then, if they need a 72-hour hold to make sure they don't hurt themselves, that can happen at the hospital. Whereas it's not going to happen if you just say, you should probably go to a counselor next week, something like that. So I would say, if you're feeling that sense of they may be suicidal right now, there's also a new number. I'm forgetting is it 311? 811? 811. I think it's 811. It's a suicide hotline that's local here in Fort Wayne. There's local people that answer that phone. Remedy FM is a service downtown that has they have 24 hours. People answer the phone for people that are in that state too. So I would just refer them as quickly as you can, and then just let them know as a friend, hey, I'm here for you, for the duration.
Yeah, the Fort Wayne Police Department does have a crisis intervention team. They're trained in mental health. They'll treat the person different.
And that's a good point. If you can't get them to go with you to the ER, calling 911. If you feel like you'd much rather make the mistake of overreacting. I think if they're starting to talk that way, questions like, do you have a plan to carry this out? Do you know how you would do it? I'm not QPR trained. That's the training for suicide prevention, but asking some of those questions to sort of get at what's really going on. And then if you can't get them to do something right then, calling 911, getting the police there that have that training for sure. Other questions, comments? I'll tell you two sort of opposite responses to that. One is, my therapist told me when I was very stressed and burned out, she said, you're not really going to be able to recover until you've transitioned, and you're not in this role anymore. So that was probably true. Second of all, I will say it's not as easy to quit your job as people pretend it is, because money matters. If it's somebody that it's not as crucial that they make that money and they've got a safe place that someone else is going to take care of them for a while, I think sooner than later, for sure, in those situations, to preserve their mental health. It's difficult because how do you communicate to someone, you do kind of need to keep making money, and also your mental health is the most important thing at the same time, and it's really hard to know, like, that throttle of which you choose. I think for the person who leaving their job is not going to ruin a whole family's finances or ruin the trajectory they're on, then let's get out of that job quickly. And it's, shouldn't say this in a room full of people that all work in the same department, but you kind of got to stop thinking about what's going to happen at work after I'm gone, because it's most important at that point, if you're really at that burned out point, to think about, how am I going to survive? Because here's the amazing thing. Lots of people have left this department before. Here you are. You're still doing the work. Like, things carry on, right? Yep. No one's irreplaceable. The progress, the system will continue. We started with you talking about retirement, and at the end talking about not being irreplaceable. So that's a good place. All right. Thank you, guys.